Hello and welcome to another episode of Chekpoint, the podcast highlighting and telling the stories of influential leaders in and around the sports industry. Today, we are excited to welcome our next guest, Jake Crain, to the show. Jake is currently the host of his own podcast, the JBoy Show, and is topping the charts and going toe-to-toe with some of the biggest sports talk shows out there. Jake and I go way back to my playing days at South Alabama, where he followed his late father's footsteps and took his incredible sports background and got into coaching. After a successful coaching career at the high school and collegiate level, he decided it was time to carve out his own path in sports by interviewing influencers and giving a unique perspective to how sports are covered. Throughout his tenure as a podcast host, Jake has had the privilege of interviewing a wide array of guests on his show, from notable Auburn alumni to the greats in the industry such as Woody Page and Bob Ryan. Jake brings his unique perspective on what's going on in this fall in sports, and we are excited to have him on the show. He currently lives in Tupelo, Mississippi, but for the next 45 minutes, he's hanging out here with us on Chekpoint. Jake, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing today?
Scott, number one, thank you for letting me come on the show. I love the podcast, man. And just knowing you, I knew it was going to be great when you told me you were going to be doing it. But man, I'm doing great. It's another day I opened my eyes and just excited to be talking with a good old buddy of mine.
Man, I got to tell you, this is episode 9 or 10 for us, and we've had some amazing guests come on the show, Jake, but I think this is the point in my sort of short tenure as a podcast host where it goes full circle. We used to be on the football field. You were my GA for my 5th year. I can't believe that we're sitting here as adults almost 10 years later, chopping it up, talking about, this crazy fall that we're experiencing, in the sports community from youth to pro. So why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about your journey, where you started, and how you ended up, carving out your niche with the JBoy Show.
Yeah, man. Well, it's a pretty interesting story. Obviously, you talked about my dad. I grew up, I'm from Auburn, Alabama. Grew up in a household where, in the state of Alabama, football is king. And, I had a dad that played at Auburn, played in the NFL, coached for a while in the SEC. And, growing up in our house, when football was on, you watched it, and there was a certain way you watched it. And he used to sit me down in front of the TV when I was 11, 12 years old and make me answer questions about, was that the power? Was that the counter? What's the difference between the power and the counter? So, which was great because it formed obviously a great bond with us. But yeah, man, went to Oblega High School, ended up signing with South Alabama to play baseball. Played for a year and a half, had a shoulder deal, and it really just didn't work out. But it's kind of funny how things happen. Got involved, obviously, in coaching, and worked my way up from a student assistant with Tommy Perry, and which is, if you know Tommy, it's not the easiest job in the world, but it's worked my way up from there all the way up to basically, you were there coaching the special teams as a 22, 23-year-old, and a year and a half older than the players, and it was a great experience. You're doing it against Tennessee, and as my career moved on, I got to see a lot of cool places. Was in Montana for a little bit, was in a cool part of Iowa in Council Bluffs, right across the water from Omaha. And, you get to meet a lot of really cool people, and not to be too long-winded, it's funny because I say, coronavirus hit and came back. But, when I came back, when I was out in Montana coaching, I obviously came back for Christmas break. This is before COVID or anything like that. And, flew into Memphis, about an hour drive to Tupelo. And, me and my brother were driving. He was going to take me up to the airport, drop me off, whatever. And so on the ride up there and really the whole time back, I've been doing this. I've basically been doing this my whole life. And I love it. You know me, I'm the most competitive person in the world. But on the ride there, and, I don't know, divine intervention, I don't know, but just maybe burn out a little bit. But I just looked at my brother. I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do this year. He was like, for real? I was like, yeah. I was like, just kind of explained to him a little bit. We're sitting in the parking lot of the Memphis airport. So we're already there. And so I'd been thinking about this the whole drive, the hour up there. And, my brother's always going to tell me what he thinks. So I always tell him back. He's like, listen, if you don't want to do it, man, then don't do it. Because I know you. And for you to say you don't want to do it, then, you must not really want to do it. So the next question is, well, what are you going to do? If I'm not going to do this, then what am I going to do? So, obviously I want to do in sports as a broadcast journalism major, and was like, you know what, I'll do a podcast. And, it just absolutely blew up, and it's such a, funny story. And I know you like funny stories, but so, me, I'm not a technological, I'm not Steve Jobs, I'm not a savvy technological person, but I can do enough to work. So I download Anchor, kind of look up, how everything works, whatever. And so I put out a few, and I don't know what's good, Scott. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, like, what amount of views is good. So I think like Joe Rogan, like 200,000 views. So in Anchor, it tells you how many views you got. And so I'm looking, I'm like, man, it's like even just starting out kind of out of nowhere with no huge promo. There wasn't a rollout. There was nothing. It was a cold podcast start. That's what it was. And so I just threw it out there, and I'm looking at the views, and it's, it's like 600, then it's 800, then it's 1,000. It's going up and up and up and up. So I'm doing it because I do it 6 days a week. I release 6 episodes a week. So I'm doing, so it's a ton of content. And so about 2 weeks goes by. It's starting to get really like social media. I'm starting to get a lot of followers, and the reach is starting to get crazy. And I get a call about 10 in the morning from a 710 number. I think it was a California number. And I'm like, oh God, I thought it was Bear. Call me back. I was like, Nick. I know he's out there, man. And that's an inside joke for anyone who doesn't know. But but I answer it, and it's a guy that is basically like a talent scout, whatever you want to call it, for a place called IBN Sports, and with Dave Meltzer. He works at Media One, owned by, I think, Meltzer and Warren Moon or something like that. Yep. And if you're ever on LinkedIn, every time Dave Meltzer comes on. But so he tells me, he's like, hey, man, do you know like how good the show's doing? And I'm like, nah, I think it's doing good. Like, people like it. I haven't gotten a lot of hate mail, getting good reviews. And he's like, well, you're like number 3 in the country in sporting news right now. And I was like, what? And I thought it was a joke. Then I was like, okay. So, I was like, do you have any way to prove this? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm going to hang up the phone, and I'll send you pictures of the charts, because obviously they get charts. So, man, he sends me a picture, and this is because the show's only 4 months old. And he sends me the picture, and I'm number 3. And it's like Boomer Esiason show, Sports Illustrated, and it's like me. Then it's like 247 Sports, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm sitting in a back room in Tupelo, Mississippi with, because I recorded it in really the cheapest way possible. I just got a mic, and I would call on the phone and put the phone on speaker and put it up to the mic and record that way. And I'm beating guys that are in, $1 million studios and stuff like that. I don't have near the network. And he's like, listen, we want to, and that's when it just, started to erupt. And 2 weeks later, I hit number 1, and it's just been, we hit number 1 on Podbay. It's just been crazy. And it's just, I think a lot of it is timing. Timing's everything, but it's been a whirlwind, man. I'm enjoying it.
I got to tell all you listeners out there to think that Jake Crain is leading the charts of podcasts. One, it doesn't surprise me. But the only thing that surprises me is that he's able to show up 6 days a week with his head on straight, because this was my coach. Then mind all you listeners, we would practice early in the morning. Jake's not a morning person. So so he would show up, and he would, sometimes I was there a little early and I would beat him there. And then one morning he shows up and he's got 2 different shoes on.
Yeah. Well, well, it's, dude, that's not my fault, because, and here's the reason. And this, you remember the turfs that they gave everybody, coaches and players. And, I had been there a while, so I had like 2 or 3 different pairs, and they're all black, and they all have the white Nike check. And so, we're practicing so early, and see, that's why I would stay later than everybody else. Everybody would leave the field house at like 10:30, and they'd see me in there and like, dude, you're crazy. And I wouldn't leave every night to midnight. Well, no, what I was doing was making sure every single piece of paper that I had to get ready for practice, every scheme thing was done that night, so I could just spend that extra 30 minutes just to sleep. That way I didn't have to go, because, we'd have our meetings, whatever, in the afternoon. And that morning, I'll never forget it. because again, you wake up in the morning and you're getting ready, and I'm one of those people that I'm wake up, getting ready, go there because you're about to coach a practice. So you're just going to shower after the practice because it makes no sense. You know what I'm saying? Whatever.
Yep.
So it's a dark closet, and I open up the closet, and I have my shoes in a row, but they're all the same color. And I think I just grabbed a left foot and a right one that looked the same. Go out there because it'd still be kind of dark when we're going out there. All of a sudden, the sun comes out, and they're two totally different shoes. So that is a true story. That did happen, but there was a reasoning behind that, and I'm sticking to that story, Scott. I don't care what you say.
As you should, but to further iterate on it, I knew at that moment in time that Jake Crain was going to be successful far before I knew I was going to be successful, because at the end of practice, I was convinced that it was almost cool and normal to be wearing two different shoes.
You know me so well
in my career, and I was just like,
you know me. I'm going to make it. I'm going to try, because you know me. It's very hard for me to get embarrassed. I'm not a very awkward person. And because, I feel like I have a good sense of humor, and, we always kept it, as light as we could. But it just gets to the point where, I think if somebody does something like that and you're like, oh my God, that's crazy. But then they own it. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like, okay, I can vibe with it. And now wearing two different shoes is cool. They're doing the NBA, Scott. So they do in the NBA. So I am the one, you're looking at me, the one that started that trend. And I would like my money, Adam Silver. Thank you.
We'll be sure to tag him, and so
please.
he can.
I know he'll respond right away.
Heard first on Chekpoint.
No, that's so funny. Dude.
I love it, man. And this is so fun to go down memory lane. It's the beautiful thing about sports and what why I've always wanted to stay in it in some capacity, whether it was on the technology side, the player athlete side, was because you build bonds like this that they just don't erode, right? Even with everything we're going through as a country, as sports leagues right now, these are the relationships that we build at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning in Mobile, Alabama, that now last decades on. So this is just so cool. But so I'm really curious, Jake, because you've had a really decorated sort of 10-year to get to this point. Sports inside and out, especially Alabama football. What was that like when you started to have these conversations with recruits, with Auburn alum, as we're now doing that in parallel with a pandemic and a shakeup that we've never seen before? What was that experience like for you?
Well, and I think if I'm hearing you right, you're talking about them just talking to them and seeing how COVID affected everything going on with the recruits and them. Is that what you're asking? Trying to make sure I answer you.
Yeah, 100%. Just trying to get that perspective.
Question. That's a great question because it affects everybody different. But one thing that I've noticed, and you know this from we both do from being recruited and being in it, is that a lot of the recruits that I've had on, and I try and get as many high profile recruits to come on because number one, it's good for them to tell their story. It's great media training for them too for the future, doing it as a high school kid. And I'm never going to put him in a bad situation or try and steal some info for a quick soundbite. But you really get to know them, and the recurring theme that keeps coming back, and it's in the shows if you listen to it, is all the guys when I ask them, because I always ask them about their routine and how COVID's affected that. Their answer is it's almost made me grind harder because I'm isolated by myself and I'm having to push myself. And it's amazing. Listen to these guys. And that's the one similar thing that a lot of them come from different situations. But the one similar thing is that they all have not been affected working out. They haven't been affected staying in shape. They haven't been affected putting a plan together, staying aware of when the dead period is being pushed. So I think it's made a lot of recruits have to grow up. And I would love to see the numbers out of this signing class 5-6 years from now. I'd almost be willing to bet they may have the highest graduation rate of a class. I think that's something that's kind of not being seen or talked about because it's positive and positivity doesn't sell. But, these guys that are used to having a coach always there and you got to get here at workouts at 6 a.m. are now to be able to live out their dream, having to do it by themselves. And a lot of them already do that. A lot of them already have that in them. But I think the ones that may have been a little prima donna-ish, that maybe had to be pushed a little bit, have now almost became more prepared to be able to do things when people aren't looking. Now, it's terrible not to be in the team setting. You'd much rather not have COVID. obviously. But I'm only saying what I hear from them, and it has not affected their grind. It's only increased it. It's only increased what they want. And I guess that's one silver lining to see. Now, when I talk to, coaches, whether it be from Auburn, Troy, we had Chip Lindsey, Troy's head coach. We got Billy Napier, ULL's head coach, who just had a big win coming on next week.
Let's go Sunbelt, baby.
Beat Iowa State on the road. Sunbelt had a great weekend. But, when I talk to them, it's so hard because, I said routine earlier for the players, but the routine's even more true for the coaches because during this time of year, this is supposed to happen. During this time of year, this is supposed to happen. And it's one big business. It's one big organization. And just like in a business, if you have a quarter of the year where everything's thrown off and you can't organize things and you don't know what time, when you're going to be able to meet again or be able to install base stuff, then you're really kind of stuck and you're scrambling. And, I think it was a scramble up until the point where guidelines were set. And it's been very, very different listening to the responses from the coaches because they're all getting pressure. A lot of it's depending on what state you live in, as crazy as that sounds. So, I've had off the records talks with coaches and athletic directors that it's out of their hands. There's only so much they can do. And at the end of the day, that's a scary situation, but it is what it is.
No, it's an interesting perspective. And, a lot of our earlier guests have shared the lens, from an athletic director realm or, maybe the mental health side of things, some of the more, not as much focused on what that athlete experience looks like during this, shakeup of the fall. So I think that's really fascinating that your through line was just putting your head down, working even harder, even with so many uncertainties on the horizon, which I just think is commendable. It's really interesting to unpack one more point you said there is like in the uncertainty comes opportunity to evolve and change, which is ultimately where our company came from, where we saw outdated process and we said, hey, we can come in and modernize this. And so I'm curious, Jake, as you're having these conversations, now with some of the premier talk show hosts in and around sports, are you seeing any new emerging technologies, whether it's from a fan experience side or a recruiting side, that are changing the game?
That's a great question. And there's one that I have, and I've told you about it, and I'll get to that in a second. But something that I've seen that's very, very interesting, Scott, and I think you're going to find this very interesting, and I think anybody that's involved in athletic administration will find this very interesting. With all the technology and from a recruiting standpoint, you've had all these virtual official visits, right? Well, the technology is so good now that the NCAA, and I know this for a fact, is considering in the future, because obviously at some point when we're somewhat back to normal, you can go on visits and stuff like this. Some of those parents and some of those kids can't make official visits all the time or something happens, right? So now you have the ability to have a virtual visit where maybe the grandmother that's sick but really wants to see where her grandson's going to college who couldn't make the official visit can now have that experience. And that's a fantastic part of it. But what the NCAA is looking at, and I think they should, and I think everybody that I've talked to about this on the show, whether it be Tim Brando, whether it be, I had Al Pogue on and Rodney Garner, Auburn's football coaches, and I actually talked with Al Pogue about this, is the NCAA going to have to start saying, all right, well, these virtual visits are so good, we're going to have to start counting them as official visits. Or do you now get one official visits, unlimited unofficial, and 2 virtuals? And then if you do only get 2 virtuals, how would you ever keep up with that? Does everybody have to use the same system? Is it like a new Zoom program? So there's different things that are coming out and new ways of recruiting, just like in any business, technological wise. But, something that I think is interesting, and I have not heard this, and I almost want to copyright this. I almost don't want to say this on the air. But again, you heard me say this on Chekpoint.
It's recorded.
Why would you not, at least for right now? Because I'm for when we're able to have fans in the stands, you got to put them in there because that's just part of it. But why not? Why has the company not? And they may have, I don't know, said, okay, well, for just like a pay-per-view amount, you buy pay-per-view. All right. And we will give you a virtual experience. So you put people with VR goggles on in the stands at the 50-yard line on each side in good spots. And you have people pay almost like for pay-per-view. And it's almost like you're looking through that lens and it's almost like you're at the game. So it's almost an in-game experience. So I'm wondering if any companies or people are going to start putting packages together to where now, if you have the capability to do that, and I'm sure they can figure out a way, you can actually have an in-game experience without being at the game until you're able to. So I just think that's been something I haven't heard about.
So, it's interesting you bring that up. And, I was an early adopter of some of the Oculus technology that came out around virtual reality. And, I remember the Masters a few years ago, I watched it, it was the only time I moved away from an Apple product because they didn't support Oculus. And I tuned in and watched 3 hole-in-ones happen on 16 at the Masters. And I was sitting right at the green, and I was like, man, like I feel like I am immersed in this sporting experience. Yeah. And so I think that technology was definitely on the horizon. And what we're seeing is that a coronavirus that is just shaking the trees harder than we've ever seen it before. It's forcing people to evolve and adapt. And I got to tell you, humans adapt pretty damn quick, man.
Well, there's a reason we've been here for so long. There's a reason we're the only animal that's out of the food chain. Like, I don't think people really understand that. Like, and you can hear, I don't have to worry about if I want to walk to the gas station down the street that a lion's going to come rip me apart. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to worry about that. If I'm getting in my car, is an anaconda going to come rip me out of it and take in the pond? Like, that's not a thing anymore. So, but speaking to that, and I do want to make this point, I think one of the reasons is because if you take COVID out of it, then it's fine because people are still going to go to the games. They're still going to pack the stands. But it'd be something great to have for somebody that couldn't get a ticket. You want to talk about StubHub, a real StubHub, that somebody doesn't have a ticket to be able to pay for that experience. But I think right now they may be a little afraid of it because it all comes down to money when you talk about sponsorships and all this. I think they're afraid, number one, is you'd have to put commercials on it. You have to put some type of advertisement on it. And number two, they don't want to discourage people from coming back because I'm sure they're wondering that they've thought of, okay, well, if this works so great, then what's going to happen to, 30% of the fans that come to the game that say, I'm not going to go through traffic. I'm not going to do that. Why would I not just be able to sit on my couch and not have to buy a $10 then Coca-Cola? I can buy a 12-pack of it right here and be at the game and not have to worry about leaving early to get home or fighting lines at the concession stand. So I think there's a lot of it that goes into it economically. I think they would rather have it as a supplement. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? To, the fans as opposed to an alternative. So I think that's the battle that's kind of maybe behind closed doors going on in that one. But, I don't want to sound, that's too speculative.
That's the sports space, though, Jake, and we know that, right?
It's business. It's business.
It's a business. And at the end of the day, the more you get towards the belly of the beast, you realize that it's just like every business. It has its highs and it has its lows. And, you take the good with the bad. And I think that, there's a lot of evolution coming to the sports industry. And it's one of those where we traditionally move a little bit slower, more like cruise ships and the, sport, professional sporting organizations, the NCAA. And so this now force mechanism is making them evolve those processes that traditionally they could get away with. So,
and I wonder, Scott, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to make sure to get this point out. I'm all for, making adjustments and doing better things, but I don't want us to lose the element of what makes sports great. And that is the ability, and I always tell the story, I'll never forget growing up, from 8 to 12 years old, we lived in a house that was somewhat close to where the stadium was. And every Saturday morning during home games, I would wake up early because I knew what time would happen. I would open the door and I could hear the band playing. And the whole day is built around you want your team to win, at least in the South. You want your team to win. That's number one. That will always take precedent. But number two is just the socialization. It's meeting new people. There's been so many husbands meet wives and wives meet husbands at tailgates and lifelong friends. And, the team people that root for opposite teams coming together at a tailgate, for 60 minutes, they hate each other, but, having a lifelong friendship. But hey, you remember the time we went to College Station and met the Smiths and hung out with them, and we ended up keeping in touch. And now there's so much more. And I don't want technology to take that experience away that I got from younger generations, because to me, that's what makes this great. I think if America was a football team, everything would work a whole lot smoother. And, it's because there's the human element to it. And any type you have, and again, I'm all for, better things, stuff like this. Never let a plane crash. The best stuff you can buy. But I don't want it to lose the human touch and the human element that goes into the stuff that surrounds the game and ultimately happens after the game. So I do want to make that point. Like I said, I'm all for moving forward. I just want to make sure that we don't jump to a point where it becomes too businessy, and we don't have or able to form those relationships that you get during this time of year.
No, you're so right. And I mean, I think it's imperative, one of my former CEOs would always talk about this is how do we humanize the technology, right?
Yeah.
Because just because, this enterprise software looks great and it could be great, does it really meet what we need in sports? And does it erode some of those traditional aspects that sports provides us? So I think it's a great point. And, I'm curious because we're in an interesting point in our country, and it's sports has sort of served as that parallel there, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an escape from reality. So as you're talking to these folks, and we're seeing more, recruits specifically, and we're seeing more athletes become and embrace their platform early on.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, are you having conversations with these folks around name, image, and likeness and how they're building their brand and how to properly utilize a platform now that you're experiencing success, on a platform that's reaching a lot of people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I talk to these guys, we talk about the name, image, and likeness and the business side of it and being able to have your brand and all that stuff. And I'm a capitalist. So I am all for that. If you're good enough, in my opinion, if you're good enough, and I'm talking about college players right now.
Yep.
If you're good enough in college that Gatorade wants to come to you and say, we want to pay you $100,000 a year or pay you $50,000 to be on a commercial, then you've earned that. You should be able to do that. Or if you're good enough where if they put your name on the back of the jersey, like in Auburn when Cam Newton was here, they sold a lot of number 2 jerseys. It didn't say Newton on the back, but everybody knew who number 2 was. And, I believe that you should get a percentage of that because that is you. And we all know that's you. No kid got a Tim Tebow numbered jersey without Tebow on the back of it because it was just a Florida jersey. So in my opinion, yes. What I want to make sure that everybody understands is it isn't to me, just blanket deal. I'm all for endorsements, but when you start talking about paying people more than a scholarship, and again, scholarships are different at different places, but a scholarship is a scholarship. That is a full scholarship. That is tangible. That is real. That is something that if you did not have it, you would have to pay a certain amount of real tender for you to be able to enter that college. So I think it'd be impossible to make it fair because it has to be fair. All right. Because now we're going to say, okay, well, we're not going to pay the walk-ons, but we'll give the scholarship guys a scholarship and extra money. That, I don't think you can balance that. I think what you do is you say, listen, here's a scholarship. And if they want to add a little stipend to it, that's fine. People do that. People do that. But I think where it gets hung up on is, number one, you're not going to be able to pay everybody fairly, and that's including women's sports, men's sports, and everybody knows that. That's just the matter of it, the way the money works. But I think if you're saying, okay, will we let the guys have endorsements? Will we let the guys get a heavy percentage? Because again, they're going to take a percentage of jersey sales. They're making the jersey. We can give the guy a high percentage of what his jersey sales are, then yes. If Body Armor wants you to come do a commercial, Joe Burrow at LSU, yes. Why not? That's capitalism. Yeah. That's fine. But when you start institutionalizing payments, then you start getting into problems because you start talking about fairness. You start talking about Title IX. So I'm going to pay the football players, but I'm not going to pay the softball players. I'm going to pay the basketball players, but I'm not going to pay the, badminton players. Doesn't matter. I just think it's such a big monster. Why not say, okay, here's your scholarship. Anything else on top of that you have earned by what you've done on the field, that is yours. That endorsement is yours. And guess what? It's a great look for LSU if Gatorade has Joe Burrow on a commercial while he's at LSU. That's a great look for recruiting because it's going to become, and it already has become for a while now, a recruiting pitch of, hey, come here. We'll get your branding done. We'll get your logo done. We'll get a website up, merchandise. Oh, that's the next step. But I think once you start talking about institutionalizing payments, it becomes an unfair practice and really an impossible task to make it truly fair. So why not just use the scholarship and then let capitalism take care of the rest?
No, it's an interesting take on it. And I think it's incredible the perspective you get based on to who you're talking to, where they're at in their journey and relationship with the NCAA. It's like you said, there's just so many different angles that we can unpack this from. The first being that I was so naive that the tax structure, right? Like the way that universities are set up and the way that scholarships are administered, does implementing a name, image, likeness start to undermine the way that the current structure is set up. And so now each individual, regardless if they excel at name, image, likeness or not, have to file their own taxes. It really, the ripple effects of this just,
there's so much. There's so much because you're incorporating yourself is what you're doing. That's what like with me with the show, like with you with the show, I'm incorporating myself. It's a brand. The JBoy is a brand. That's what it is. That's what I'm doing, incorporating myself. And that's what that's what the kids are doing and talking to recruits. And again, I don't get too much into it, with them. I'll hit it with a little bit, but they're so focused, especially the high school kids. The branding stuff's cool. They love that. They love shoes. Like some schools are now offering majors where it's shoe design. And, that's been a big hit. And which I think is awesome. When did you think being a cobbler would be one of the coolest things to do? It's so cool. It is. It's so cool. It's making stuff cool. So, at the end of the day, I think the high school kids think it's cool, but and I think it's a good thing to reward people, when other people want to reward them for success. Because again, now because there's so much, like you said, ripple effects. Now, if Gatorade endorses you, you're being put in a spotlight, and now, do guys act different? Are guys maybe a little more hesitant to get in that car after they've drank too much? If there's so much that goes into it now.
Yeah.
And I think there's some positives that come out of it. There's some negatives, obviously, because there's positives and negatives in everything. But, you start looking at tax law, you start looking at stuff like, like you said, just the structure of how it affects. All right, if you say we're at Auburn, then we're going to start paying every athlete. How does that affect the tax structure of the city of Auburn? Because that money's got to come from somewhere. So it doesn't just affect, this conversation doesn't just affect athletics. It affects the economy in general. It's a true economic issue. Now in the category, it's an athletic category, but it is a true economic issue with true economic problems. And it affects taxes. It affects everything. So, I think if you want to slay the three-headed dragon, just knock off the head in the middle. You know what I'm saying? Don't try and slice off all three of them.
Yeah, well said. No, and it's going to be very fun as you continue to, evolve your show and have guests come through and tell their story. To track that and follow you and hear if this becomes more of a recruiting point, if this becomes a decision maker with California versus Florida. There's going to be a ton of ripple effects. Really excited. And for all you listeners, if you haven't listened to the JBoy Show, it's an absolute must that you tune in. Just if you like sports talk, if you like sports radio, this guy's crushing the game. So, so Jake, so we started this journey with you telling us who you are, how you got here. We touched on some of the things that you're talking about, with your guests that have been on the show. Really curious, when we start to talk about what sports looks like on the horizon, are there any things that stick out to you where you're like, this is where I see the industry going? Whether that's collegiate, pro, youth, any trends that stick out to you?
Well, I keep noticing that games keep getting faster, whether it's, and this answer makes right, whether it's football and up tempo, whether it's basketball and everybody's just getting the ball, running down the court and shooting a three or trying to play transition up and down. In soccer, I love watching it. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert there, but, they always look like they're playing fast to me. But, I think what you're seeing is sports are always offensive. So not offensive, but offensive. What I mean by that is offense sells tickets. The old adage, offense sells tickets, defense wins championships, is a very, very true adage. But I think what you're seeing now, just from an industry standpoint, is I think we're coming to a decision, or kind of a, I guess, what do you call that? An angle or a pivot. There you go. A pivot to where we have to decide how much of sports and politics do we want to blend? How much of Sports Center and mainstream media do we want to blend? And I think right now, across the board, you've seen people reject it. You've seen people accept it. And again, it's going to go back to my main point. I just hope, and everybody that likes sports and everybody that plays sports knows what I'm saying. You love it because you love it, not because of anything else, whether it's the competition, the camaraderie. I never looked to my right when I was playing, and I never looked to my left when I was playing and cared about anything else other than I hope this guy makes a play, number one, because I want to win, but number two, because me and him have bled and sweat and been through this whole thing. And it was never a political thing. When that ball's being ran at you, when you're playing linebacker and you meet the running back in the B gap, there is nothing political about that. And I just hope that in the future, looking forward, athletes having platforms is great. Everyone should have a platform. That's what free speech is. Everyone should have a platform. I just want to make sure that we don't start viewing sports in the same lens as politics, because I feel like sports is one of the last havens that we have as a society where it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter who you worship or who you love. All that matters is, are you going to make the play when it comes your way? And I think that's what brings people together. And I just hope, regardless if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, it does not matter, that we don't lose the thing about sports that we love the most, and that's that nothing else matters except the relationships you form, the games you play, and the memories you have. And I just, I really hope that's something that people can take going on into the future.
Man, well said. As a former athlete, and we're living proof of it right here, Jake, that, these are the things in sport that you can't really replace anywhere else.
No.
Not to say that you can't build great relationships in other arenas, but like you said, waking up at 4:00 and flipping tires and
that's
yelled at.
Nothing political about that. That's it don't matter as long as you got a mask to lean on. It doesn't matter. Man,
I tell you, it's very well said, and again, really unique perspective, just because of all the different voices and channels that you're coming at it with. But at the end of the day, I know that's you, man. You've had this belief, you've had this thought since you were coaching me, and some of the stories you tell me about you and Blaine growing up. It feels like this has been a through line for your life for a while, man.
Yeah, and I just, and again, not going to get long-winded. Like, I don't, because if you say one thing, you're going to upset half people. If you say another thing, you're going to upset the other half. I'm just glad we're playing sports again, and it's really good to talk to you, Scott, and for all the listeners out there. I just hope Scott is one of the most genuinely nice human beings on the earth, and he does it not because he wants you to like him, because that's who he is, and everybody likes him because of that. So, Scott, I've always respected you. Not only as a player, even the few times me and you got into it, we always hugged each other after. I could always provide, lean on you in a tense moment to lighten it up and say, Coach, we're good. And I don't think I've ever told you how much I appreciated that, man. But I wish you the best of luck here, and I know you're going to keep doing it, because all you do is win, baby. That's all we do, baby.
I love that. So for all you listeners, before we plug Jake's podcast, so all of you can tune in, we have one question that we've been asking all of our guests. So we're going to wrap up on this one. Jake, completely outside the lines of sports and where your expertise is. So I'm really curious, but if you could tell our listeners one thing you've done in your life that you would recommend they do or experience in theirs, what would that be and why?
Oh, man. I would say one thing that you have to do is you have to go. Well, that's a great question, Scott. You have to. Okay, I got one. You have to go to the College World Series in Omaha, Nebraska. It is, and again, everybody says, oh, it's just, whatever. It is so cool because of where it is and the amount of teams that are there and the amount of people from different parts of the country all coming to the middle of the country on a hot day together, walking around. It's just the experience is great. Hearing the ball come off the bat, hearing the fans, seeing the pageantry, and just seeing the youth out there so excited. to see their favorite players play and all those people. And I love the way they set it up with the restaurants right downtown Omaha. It's just such a friendly venue, and it's multiple days, and there's so much to do out there, and it's so beautiful. I recommend that, especially if you have kids, you've got young kids that love baseball, they're little league baseball players, little league softball players. Take them. They'll love it. They let you sign autographs. It's just such a great experience for a family for more than just one game.
Wow. I would have lost money. I would have bet a healthy amount of cash that you would have said experience in Iron Bowl in Auburn. But
well, yeah, I mean, that one's just so easy, Scott.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I got to keep you guessing. You know me so well.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, a fantastic answer, and I haven't attended, but definitely on the bucket list as sports attendance comes back.
We'll go. Yeah,
let's make it happen, man. That would be amazing. And so, Jake, before we hop off the air, let all of our listeners know, where they can find you, who you're representing, just so that everybody can follow your channels and start to consume your great content.
Yeah, well, Scott, I appreciate that. We're on anywhere you get your podcasts, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We have a YouTube channel. I'm actually upgrading it right now. I'm trying to get some video in the podcast as well. But we're represented. We're in talks with Manscaped right now. I feel pretty good about that. IBN Sports is our PR team. But it's pretty cool because we have, we mix the guest style, and I've had Tim Brando, like you said, Woody Page, and I got a lot of Marcus Spears coming on and guys like that. But what's really cool, I think, is this new show I'm doing on every Friday called The Friday Fix with a buddy of mine named Philip Dukes. He's one of the top insiders at Auburn, and we're going to talk about some, some bets and some parlays and some recruiting, a little bit of everything. But it's a great time, man. It's real. If you enjoy talking sports and hearing somebody that's honest, that's going to give you their real opinion, then it's a good spot. And I appreciate it, Scott.
I love it, man. Well, you guys heard it first from JBoy himself. Jake, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure when we're able to sync back up and reminisce and, talk about how we're going to make sports just a little bit better than we found it. So for all you listeners, be sure to tune into his shows. And until next time, check yourself.